Hey everybody, welcome back to the Seagull Football Network. Super excited to see you all again. I know it's been a little bit of a break, but training camps just started, so there's some NFL news, and then we're going to jump into our NFC North deep dives. Braden, if you can jump us right into the news segment, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. So kicking us off here, kind of relevant to the topic today, we have Lions kicker Michael Badgley. They just
Hmm.
announced he is going to be out for the season with a torn hamstring. Really terrible to see such an awesome player like him go down like that. So prayers for him. Hopefully the Lions can find somebody who can come in and fill in that spot.
Hmm.
Then we also have Raiders wide receiver Michael Gallup announced he was retiring. I found this one interesting because their GM said that it was completely unexpected. They had no idea this was coming. Why do you think he would just up and retire so unexpectedly without notice?
Yeah, so I actually read something this morning that Dak Prescott had a conversation with Gallup before he retired. And he just kind of talked about how he wasn't getting the fulfillment out of football anymore. One of the things Prescott said was that he really loved Dallas and missed what Dallas gave him. I assume that that's part of it. Obviously, he was making a little less money in Las Vegas than he had during his career in Dallas. And then also, he was a little further down on the depth chart in Las Vegas, whereas in Dallas, he was number two for a majority of his career, number three for some of it. So it just seems like he really did just lose the zest and the enjoyment for football.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fair. Um, Hopefully he has a good retirement, enjoys his the rest of his money. I'm sure he's got plenty of it at this point. Next up on the news, we have the Steelers. Russell Wilson did not practice due to some calf tightness, and Justin
Hmm.
Fields took the first team snaps. That one's an interesting one to keep an eye on. And then we've talked a little bit about who's going to start the season. This opportunity for Justin Fields might give him a little bit more of a leg up than he initially started with. So definitely one to keep an eye on. We've got three bits of safety news. The Titans signed safety Jamal Adams. The
Hmm.
Seahawks extended Julian Love, and the Patriots extended Jabril Peppers. I think that last one just happened this morning. Another one from today. The Dolphins and Tua Tagovailoa agreed to an extension of 4 years, $212.4 million dollars with $167 million guaranteed. That put him at the time of the signing at the third highest paid quarterback in the NFL. What are your thoughts on this deal? Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it appropriate?
Yeah, so I'd actually be interested. Obviously, it's so new, I haven't gotten a chance to dig into it, but I'd be interested to kind of again see the breakdown of what that contract actually looks like, dollar by dollar, year by year. Because obviously, $53 million per year, I think it is a lot of money. It puts him up there in terms of APY. Um, but I know that the Dolphins, the reason that it took so long to reach that deal in the first place is the Dolphins. Were failing to meet what Tua wanted, and the fact that now he's what you said number three highest paid by APY. The fact that they were willing to agree to that tells me that it's probably at least structured somewhat like maybe Jalen Hurts' contract or something like that, where there's some dead years on the back and they aren't actually paying him as much per year as the APY comes across. All things considered, though, it's great that they got him under contract, obviously, for a good long time. Miami's got a nice window with him, and they've got a really good roster around him to keep them competitive.
Yeah, absolutely. This last piece of news just broke 10 minutes ago. So this is really, really fresh. We're recording this Friday, July 26th. Um, Jordan Love and the Packers agreed
Oh,
to a 4 year
wow.
extension of $220 million, making him the highest paid quarterback in NFL history.
Oh, man.
$155 million in guarantees and $75 million signing bonus, which is also a record.
Okay.
What a bombshell on the night of the NFC North podcast. Holy cow.
I have an entire like three paragraphs about Jordan Love and whether they pay him, whether they don't, and what that makes the Packers look like this year. Oh, that's
Just
really
cross it
interesting.
out. They paid him. We're good.
They didn't just pay
Yeah,
him,
so I'm
they
sure.
paid him the most money that a quarterback's ever made. That's wild.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll get more into that when we dive into the Packers. We'll digest that for a couple minutes. In the meantime, let's dive into the Detroit Lions. Let's talk about them. Awesome showing last season. I think they blew a lot of people's expectations out of the water. So they're a really fascinating team to look at. They definitely had some weaknesses last year. Um, but let's dive into what we feel like their strength is this year. What do you think their biggest strength is going to be in the 2024 season?
Yeah, so I mean, first kind of playing to what you just said about them having some weaknesses last year. I will preface the Detroit Lions dive by saying I think that they've really taken care of those weaknesses. And I see the Detroit Lions as potentially one of the most likely Super Bowl contenders this year. Um, they've built one of the most steady contenders over the last 2 or 3 years. They've just steadily gotten better and been consistent. And I really do think they handled the things that were bad last year. And I'm really excited to see that going into 2024. Now, my biggest strength, I put as the offensive weapons, being running backs, receivers, tight ends, etc. The pieces around Jared Goff. In their running back room, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs run it back as the two starting running backs. They combined for almost 2,400 yards receiving and rushing last year, which is a lot of yards. Typically, when you've got a multi-back system like that, one of them's more of a heavy carry, one of them's more of heavy receiving, and you kind of mash them together and get not 1,800, 1,900 yards. But that's the thing is they both ran. I think Montgomery ran for over 1,000 and Gibbs ran for almost 1,000. And then they both are good receivers. Montgomery proved when he was in Chicago and then again here in Detroit that he can catch the ball almost as good as he can run it. Early season, Montgomery was their bell cow. And as the season went on, Gibbs was worked in. And Montgomery became a halftime bell cow, and Gibbs carried it too. It was really impressive to see Gibbs's development and the way that they played both of those running backs equally throughout the season. In the receiver room, they have Amon-Ra St. Brown, who did everything he possibly could to be one of the best receivers in 2023. We just discovered in the receiver show on Netflix that he worked through a torn oblique, fully torn, I think in week 6 or something like that, and still came out with 1,500 yards and 62% success rate, which is insane. Very good receiver and will continue to be a good receiver. Now they did lose their number 2 receiver in Josh Reynolds to the Denver Broncos, but they do have Jamison Williams still, who was a first rounder, I think, in 2022. I don't think he's ever going to be an elite player like some projected him to be, but he did get better last year as the year went on after he got over the injuries. And everything that's coming out of training camp is that he's fast, he's quick, he's over those injuries, and that could be a very good sign for the Detroit Lions. They're number 3 now that Josh Reynolds is in Denver is Khalif Raymond, who has been with the Detroit Lions for a couple of years now. He's proven himself in past years to be a solid rotational receiver. Now, below those 3, there are some depth concerns. There aren't a lot of great receivers below them, but assuming they stay healthy, things should go rather smoothly. And then finally, Sam Laporta was incredible as a rookie tight end. He turned 120
Hmm.
targets into 889 yards. I would expect the same or even better from Sam Laporta because now he's not a rookie. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I pretty much completely agree. I listed the whole offense. I think some credit's got to be given to their offensive line as well. Just a phenomenal group. They've got some really, really solid players. Frank Ragnow is a potentially one of the best centers in the NFL ever. I have so much respect for what he's done the years that he's been there. But yeah, I went with the offense. They had the third most points last season behind only Miami and San Francisco. And yeah, I think honestly, I think Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Montgomery, Gibbs, and Sam Laporta might be the best five-man offensive group that you could pull from any team. I don't know that you could take any other team and pull five players from the offense that would beat them. As for the receiver depth, they also do have, I want to point out, Donovan Peoples-Jones, who, he's not the flashiest, he's not the best. But he's a solid receiver who will definitely help add some additional depth there.
Hmm.
But yeah, I completely agree. I think their offense and especially their offensive weapons are just phenomenal.
Yeah, no, Peoples Jones is a good receiver. Big guy, solid player, returning to Michigan after he was traded to Detroit. Obviously, every Michigan fan remembers him as a very good receiver. And people forget that he did have like a 600, 800 yard season in 21 and 22. So, like, he is a good receiver. So, if things go wrong, he can step in. Here's hoping that he doesn't have to. But you're right. They do have some depth.
Yeah. As for the Detroit Lions' biggest weakness, I went with the safeties. Um, Last year, I think their secondary was their weakest point. I feel like they've really done a decent job addressing the cornerback position. We'll talk about one of those later, I'm sure. Um, I'm just not convinced fully on their safeties at the moment. Last year, they allowed the second most pass yards in the NFL, and safety is a really hard position. It's very difficult. Your awareness has to be perfect. Your speed has to be really good. And I just don't know that I've seen the right moves to fix that position. What are your thoughts on that?
I can see that being the case. I think one of the problems with their safety duo last year was they were having to do too much. The defense they were running, the cornerbacks couldn't keep up with what was happening around them, and unfortunately, Kirby Joseph and rookie Brian Branch both uh, suffered from that. I can understand kind of why you say that's their weakest position, and I kind of agree with you. But I do think that their safeties will be significantly better. Obviously, Kirby Joseph last year came away with, I think it was 4 interceptions, and Brian Branch was a rookie. I think that they will look better now that the Detroit Lions have done work on their cornerbacks. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Brian Branch I thought was actually really, really solid last year overall, um, especially for a rookie. I thought he had a phenomenal season. Um, and me picking the safeties is by no means like their safeties are terrible. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the Lions don't have major holes right now.
Yep.
Similar to what we talked about with the 49ers, they don't have quite the same number of flashy players on both sides of the ball, in my opinion. I think their defense is definitely weaker than their offense, but their defense is still phenomenal. It's incredible. And if I had to pick one position, I think safeties just happens to be the weakest point.
Yeah, yeah, I can agree with that. Because I agree with you, and the team really doesn't have a lot of holes. I put for my weakness their depth because the more that I looked into the roster and the more that I kind of viewed each position, that's the more that I realized, okay, there are some depth issues with this team. Now, if the Detroit Lions stay healthy throughout the season and they don't have an issue with depth or anything like that, they'll be in the playoffs and they'll have a chance at the Super Bowl and all of that. But if they do start having significant, maybe Bengals-ish injuries, how the Bengals were last year or the Vikings were last year, we could
Yeah,
see a very different Lions team this year because their depth is not very solid.
yeah, I agree completely. Speaking of the defense, for my X factor, I picked Aiden Hutchinson. I think he has just been phenomenal his first two seasons. He had 21 sacks across the seasons. I think he definitely has a better supporting cast on the line with him this year than he has in the past. Um, I love the attitude he brings to the defense. He's really proven himself to be a leader there, not just for the defense, but for the whole team as well. Um, I think if Aiden Hutchinson keeps up what he's been doing, they'll have a great season, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Who did you pick for X Factor?
Yeah, so kind of playing off of what you talked about with the weakness and kind of my response to that. For the X factor, I put the secondary. Um, I I don't think anybody would disagree that the Lions secondary was pretty much the reason that they did not play in the Super Bowl in 2023. Matthew Stafford and Baker Mayfield in their two playoff games pre 49ers both threw for nearly 400 yards. I think Stafford was at like 397 and Mayfield was like 360 something. Um, Now, Matthew Stafford is a prolific passer and Baker Mayfield is a good passer, but both almost hitting 400 yards in back to back games against the secondary is embarrassing.
Hmm.
Um, in the NFC Championship game, obviously they played the 49ers. The 49ers do prioritize the run game. They try to kind of pound the rock and, keep Brock Purdy throwing in very specific situations, which is good for their offense. And the Lions pulled ahead because they were able to stop the run. If you watch the game back, as soon as the 49ers stopped trying to rely on Christian McCaffrey and the ground game, Detroit got torched again. And they got torched against the Rams, they got torched against the Buccaneers, and then the 49ers torched them and they won the game. The Lions offense and the rest of their defense, the run defense, the pass rush, they were very, very good, and they were good enough to keep them winning games throughout the regular season and most of the playoffs. But eventually they just got tired and they couldn't keep doing that over and over and over. The Lions made a lot of changes this year to counter that. Obviously, they drafted day one starter Terrion Arnold out of Alabama. They traded for Tampa Bay's starter Carlton Davis. And then they signed Las Vegas's slot cornerback Amik Robertson. Those three are probably going to be their starters going into this year. And the fact that those three are completely different than the three that they went into the season last year with is really impressive and it's exciting.
Hmm.
Additionally, they drafted Enos Rakestraw from Missouri, who won't start day one, but he is a developmental player and he could start both in the slot or outside if the need arises. Additionally, last year they signed Emmanuel Mosley from San Francisco in free
Hmm.
agency. He was injured to start the season, but he came back in week 5. But his very first game back, he tore his ACL and it ended his season. Emmanuel Mosley is back. He likely won't be the starter this year, but he definitely can start and he will play in key situations throughout the season. That
Yeah,
being said, if they can play to the level that they should and they play like a secondary that they are paying, I see very few holes in this roster. Now, if the secondary struggles again, they're not playing in the playoffs as well as they could.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Again, we've got a perfect segue here. Leading into the notable rookie, I picked Terrion Arnold. Um,
Yes.
yeah, like you said, I mean, it's a position where he can come in, he can start, he can have an instant impact on the field. In his last season at Alabama, he had 5 interceptions. He's definitely got that ball hawk lockdown like potential. I think if he can get up to the NFL speed these next couple weeks during training camp, I think he'll be able to slot right in and start defending the pass and help this defense out where they really needed it.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people, there was a lot of back and forth about whether Terrion Arnold or Kool-Aid McKinstry was the better Alabama cornerback.
Hmm.
And I think Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid was a significantly more like pro-ready player. He's ready to go out and he's ready to be consistent and he's not going to allow too much. Terrion Arnold is your big play cornerback. He's the one who's getting the picks. He's the one who's going to just, hit the living daylights out of somebody. He's the kind of player that you want on a team like the Detroit Lions. Dan Campbell's always talking about grit, grit, grit. And Terrion Arnold is that type of player. I remember seeing
Yeah,
a quote
absolutely.
during mini camps. Arnold said something along the lines of like, "Oh, if my mom was lined up across from me, I'd hit her the same way." And that is
Yeah.
a wild statement to make, but also it tells you exactly what kind of player he is. So I love that notable rookie.
Yeah, I think
Um,
he really fits the environment and the attitude of the Detroit Lions.
I agree completely. I'm very excited to see him suit up day one.
Hmm.
My notable rookie was defensive lineman Makai Wingo. He was drafted in the 6th round, 189th overall, out of LSU. A lot of people might ask, why did I pick a 6th rounder? Well, first of all, he fell to the 6th round. He was injured his final year in college. He only played 8 games. But I think it's worth noting in those 8 games, he had 9.5 sacks and tackles for loss. That's a lot of sacks and tackles for loss for a player who only played 8 games. Now, there are some other concerns with his game. He is a little bit undersized. He does make up for that with unreal speed from the three tech position, however. He's a very great pass rushing defensive lineman. And obviously, he won't be a starter this year. He needs to work on his run defense. He needs to work on, responses to heavier, more power focused offensive linemen. But if there was a defensive line he wants to be on to learn, Detroit is one that he can learn from. I think it's one of the best defensive lines to educate a young defensive lineman like Wingo, and I'm really excited to see him play.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a good opportunity for him to come in and find his place in the line and kind of grow into it. Last up
Mhm.
for the Lions, we have their notable games, the games we should pay attention to. Um, Really, I think all of them are important for the Lions this year. I think this is their season to really prove that they can go all the way, prove that they should be taken seriously, that they're an actual threat in the NFC. But with that said, I think it's worth noting they have an early bye, and all of their
Mhm.
first 6 games are against NFC rivals. It's only
Yep.
in week 8 that they face an AFC opponent. So that early stretch is going to be really kind of a tone setter for their season.
I agree completely. A week 5 bye hurts a lot, and I think obviously those first 7 weeks, those first 6 games, all of them are tough opponents. But I think everybody would pretty much agree the Rams, the Buccaneers, the Seahawks, the Cowboys, and the Vikings are all at least competing for a playoff spot, if not already pretty much locks in the case of teams like Dallas and potentially Los Angeles. Those are really strong teams, and Arizona, I don't see them as a playoff team this year, but I do think they can give some teams fits. So I agree completely. Those are some tough games. And two of the biggest games I wrote down were from that group of 6 that you were talking about, being versus Los Angeles Rams in
Mhm.
week 1 and versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 2. Those are both playoff rematches. Obviously, Matthew Stafford and the Rams return to Detroit to play them in week 1, and then Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers return in week 2. The interesting part of this is obviously the Detroit Lions have improved, especially that secondary. So it'll be interesting to see how these passers perform against an obviously much better group of players back there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be nice that we have those games kind of almost side by side with the playoffs and then the start of the season. So we'll be able to kind of compare statistically the performances of these two teams and really get a gauge for how they improved, how maybe they got worse, specific position groups um, that maybe improved or got worse. I know we're probably going to see the effect of Aaron Donald retiring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's going to be a clear difference there. Um, but yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting with those two games, pretty much comparing them directly to the the games that they are rematches of from last year.
Yep, exactly. It's kind of a litmus test, if you will, of 3 different NFC playoff teams who all played each other uh, in
Mhm.
quick succession last year. It's going to be really interesting. I agree.
Yeah. Do you have anything else for the Lions?
I do not. Like I said, I believe that this team is one of the most competitive in the NFL, potentially second only to the 49ers in terms of uh, just how well rounded the roster is. And they may even be better than the 49ers.
Ooh, that's a tough one to say, but I definitely agree they have one of the top rosters right now.
Look, I see like the big
Uh,
four as the four who were in the championship games. And that sounds lame and boring because it's just a repeat of 23. But I really do see it as the Ravens and the Chiefs in the AFC and the Niners and the Lions in the NFC. And those four are
no,
the
I
teams to beat.
I agree completely. Yeah, that does bring us down here to the Green Bay Packers. For the strength, this is going to seem a lot better with the news. I put Jordan Love. I
Ah,
did. I think in his first full season, he really proved his worth. Maybe not the worth that we're seeing now. I guess we'll just see what he does this season. But he did pass for over 4,000 yards. He had 32 touchdowns, And while he did have 11 interceptions, all of those except for one were in the first 9 games of the season. And there was a marked difference between first half Jordan Love and second half Jordan Love. I don't know what clicked. I don't know what corner he turned, but between the first and second half, something changed, and he was a completely different player in the second half of the season. And I think if he continues that momentum from the end of last season, I think he could really do something incredible with the Packers this season.
Yeah, I don't know. I have thoughts on Jordan Love, and I promise to all of our viewers, it's not just because I'm a Bears fan. Look, we've dealt with watching elite Packers quarterbacks stomp the Bears every year. So it's not saltiness. I get it. I'm used to it. It's I have my thoughts, and I will get to those because I have Jordan Love placed in a starkly different category in my deep dive. So I'll definitely get to that, but I see the argument you're making, and it's a valid argument, if that makes sense.
Mhm. So, who do you have as your strength for the Packers?
My biggest strength is the front seven. The front seven, I think, was very solid last year with Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary as the starting rushers. Lucas Van Ness was a rotational pass rusher, and I mean, I think he put up like 6 sacks as a rotational player. He was a first rounder. Kenny Clark and Devontae Wyatt putting up great pass rush and run defense numbers from the inside. At the linebacker level, Kay Walker is just an unreal athlete. He's a video game character. And the way that he plays football, it's insane. He plays every down like it's his last. And they drafted K Walker 2.0 in Edgerrin Cooper this year in the second round. And then they drafted developmental K Walker with Tyron Hopper in the draft. I think that was fourth round. They've got some great linebackers, some of the most athletic guys in the draft. Literally, Cooper and Hopper were two of my favorite athletic profile players, and the Packers got them both. Um, I think these players, all the front seven players, will give the slightly spotty secondary an easier job. Now, some may make the argument that, hey, why didn't these players give them that easier job last year? And it's worth noting that the Packers did make a change in defensive coordinator from Joe Barry, who was there for a good 5 or 6 years, to former Boston College head coach Jeff Hafley. And I think
Mhm.
that these players are going to thrive in the new kind of 3-4 defense that they're going to be running with a single high safety. What are your thoughts?
I'm going to disagree with you slightly, um, and that's somewhat relevant to my the weakness that I listed. If you look at their run defense last year, it was really bad. Fifth worst in the NFL based on yards per game. 127.1 yards rushing yards per game from their opponents. That's really not good. And I know they've got really physically talented guys. I think their pass rush was really good. I don't like the run defense, and beyond the rookies that they drafted, which may fix that problem. Um, but I never want to bet fully on a rookie stepping up and performing perfectly. Beyond those, I didn't really see moves to fix that. And it's possible for sure that like a change in defensive coordinator will help remedy some of that. Um, but just based on those stats from last year, and having a couple question marks of we're just not sure exactly how it's going to work out with these newer guys. That's what I listed as my biggest weakness. Other than that, I agree. I think their defense has been fairly strong, especially that pass rush. I know that was pretty formidable the last couple seasons.
Yeah, I kind of get what you're saying. And I understand. Yeah, no, they allowed 2,200 rushing yards last year and 15 touchdowns. Yeah, which is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. But like I said a minute ago, there's a reason Joe Barry was fired. And I'm a big fan of Jeff Hafley. He put up a really good defense at Boston College for the last 2 or 3 years, or however long he was over there. One of the best defenses in college football, and it's Boston College. It's not like they're Alabama or Clemson, right?
Right.
Um, Very good defense, and I think that Jeff Hafley is going to take the players he has and do much better things with them than Joe Barry. And I'm not sitting here saying it's all a scheme issue. I'm just saying they're going to look a whole lot better in a new scheme.
Yeah, that's fair. What did you end up picking for their biggest weakness then?
For the Green Bay Packers' biggest weakness, I put their receiving core. Green Bay, specifically offensive play caller Matt LaFleur, also head coach, they claim that one of their strengths as a team is that any one of their offensive playmakers can be the focal point of the offense any given week. And yes, that's true. But it still helps to have an alpha game breaking receiver. Think Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson. I mean, Puka Nakua, need I go on? These players, they're known for a reason, and it's because any given week they can put up 170 yards and, two touchdowns. They're good players. They're so good that teams don't know how to respond to them, right? And I'm not saying a team can't get off with, a couple of receivers who are good, not great. But it's just hard to look at this group of pass catchers and say that's a great pass catching group. Okay, Christian Watson was taken really high in the second round a couple of years back, and he's yet to make an impact as such. I think the most receiving yards he put up was like 400. That's not great for somebody who's that high drafted. Romeo Dobbs was relatively unknown when he was drafted, but he is a good receiver. He knows how to make an impact, but he still needs work as a receiver, and he's no number one guy. Jaden Reed was taken in the late second round last year. I like him. He's fast. He's played well, but he's not a number one by any means, and I don't think Green Bay saw him as such when they drafted him. Beyond those three, there's not really a lot of strength in this receiving core at all. Tight end Luke Musgrave obviously should make a larger impact this year. Tight ends sometimes struggle early in their careers, playing in different schemes and things. And he dealt with a rather major injury, being a lacerated kidney last year in like week 7, I think. So he should be better. But by and large, I'm really not confident in that receiving core. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. If I hadn't gone with the run defense, I would have picked the receiving core or Andre Dillard, who they signed in the offseason. Um, as a Titans fan,
Yeah.
I suffered through enough of him. He's bad. But yeah, as for the pass catch,
I will interject there. Andre Dillard, as long as everything goes well, injuries wise, Andre Dillard shouldn't be starting.
no, absolutely
Um,
not. Yeah, he should not start.
this obviously they drafted Jordan Morgan out of Arizona in the first round. They've said time and time again he's going to play tackle. He's going to play tackle. I don't see him as a tackle, but the Packers are confident, so he's going to play tackle. Obviously, they've got guard Elton Jenkins and center Josh Myers returning from last year. Tackle Rasheed Walker was solid. I think that Andre Dillard is more of an insurance policy in case Walker regresses or gets injured. And then obviously, I think they're going to take tackle Zach Tom from last year and move him inside. But there's a very real chance that they could put Jordan Morgan inside and Zach Tom back outside. Either way, they've got a solid offensive line. I don't think there's any need for Dillard.
Yeah, I just wanted to get that jab in for all the sacks he allowed on Tannehill and Levis. But as for
It
the
was painful, I
yeah,
agree.
as for the Packers pass catchers, I agree. Beyond Christian Watson, who I've seen, I like the flashes he's shown, but yeah, he's not that number one. I just checked a second ago. He had 611 yards 2 years ago, and then 400 something last year. Not enough to be a number one receiver. Romeo Dobbs is all
No.
right, and it's impressive what Rodgers and Love were able to do with these middling pass catchers. Obviously, Rodgers had Devontae Adams as well, but um,
Yeah, he does kind of make an impact on game
yeah,
day.
definitely. But yeah, beyond those two being all right, there's really nothing super impressive. So yeah, I agree with that pick 100%.
Yeah, and I mean, I will add on too. Like I know some weeks last year, Green Bay, their hot hand player, if you will, was a running back. Sometimes the running back would get all the targets. It's worth noting though they let Aaron Jones go in free agency to Minnesota, and then they also signed Josh Jacobs. They paid him a lot of money to come into Green Bay, and Josh Jacobs is very good on the ground and he's okay as a receiver. It's worth noting though Josh Jacobs has never had a receiving touchdown, not once in his career. He's actually something like 40 or 50 catches away from breaking the record for most catches without a touchdown in a running back's career. which is really sad. So again, it's a testament to Jordan Love seeing what he can do with the weapons that they've given him. But come on, give him something better.
Well, speaking of, the X Factor I picked is actually Josh Jacobs. Um, I
Ah,
honestly found this one of the most surprising moves in free agency. Them letting Aaron Jones walk and bringing in Josh Jacobs. I'm not convinced it's an upgrade necessarily. Um,
I
they
agree.
definitely fulfill different roles. I think Josh Jacobs is much more of a head down, barrel through some people. Aaron Jones was a little bit shiftier, a little bit better, like you said, the pass catching. Um, but that doesn't mean that I don't think there's a role for Josh Jacobs. I think he has a definite role that he could step into. This might be kind of a make or break point for his career, honestly. After he had the rushing title a couple years ago, he really kind of took a step back, was not a solid running back. So this might be a good opportunity for him to kind of redeem himself, prove that he's still got what it takes. Um, and I think they really need a running back in this offense who's going to help relieve some of the pressure off of Love, make his job a little bit easier, and his success will help determine whether or not that actually happens.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think Josh Jacobs kind of serves the role of Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon in a way in terms of production. Um, you know, the reason that running backs got so devalued in, the past 3 or 4 years is most running backs are, and it sounds bad to say, but most running backs are replaceable. And then there's like 3 to 5 guys a year who are just elite and they're just those guys, and it's really hard to get one guy to kind of replace and fill that hole. That being said, I think Josh Jacobs can be one of those guys who's like a top 3 to 5 running back in the league. It's just whether he can come back to what he was when he had that rushing title. If he doesn't come back to what he was and he plays the same way he has, last year, I feel like Josh Jacobs is a lateral move from Aaron Jones for more dollars, which is not a good move at all.
Right. Yeah. So who did you end up with your X factor? Did you pick Jordan Love here?
I'm so excited to talk about this. My X factor was Green Bay Packers quarterback Jordan Love. First round in 2020, sat behind Aaron Rodgers for potentially too many years. And, you already talked about he had a stellar second half season. If the season were 8 games long and we started in October, Jordan Love would be the MVP, right? 70% completions, 2150 yards, 18 touchdowns, one interception, and 8.8 yards per attempt. For more casual listeners, your average is usually like 7.2, 7.3. That's like a good yards per attempt average. That's really, really, really good. But people forget, you kind of talked about it, that he was not nearly as impressive in the first half. In fact, he was actually kind of painfully bad. 59% completions, 2,009 yards, 14 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and 6.1 yards per attempt. That first 8 or 9 games compares almost perfectly to Daniel Jones's first 9 games in 2022. That's not good. That's not what you want. Um, the first half of the Green Bay Packers season, I remember reading a lot about people putting the Packers in the conversation for a new QB going into 2024. Obviously, Jordan Love's second half of the season fixed that. 18 touchdowns and one interception will do that to you. And the Packers decided, hey, we need to keep this guy around. He did a lot of things. And there's a valid point to be made that Love grew and he learned throughout the season. And like you said, like you don't know exactly what changed, but something flipped for him. But at the same time, there's a possibility that his final 8 games were more fluky than the first nine. Who's to say that those final ones were the real Love and those first nine were the fluky Love? It could be vice versa. It could be switched. Obviously, I said here Love is currently working with the Packers toward a new contract, but obviously we've got him. He's got his bag now, and now that he has the money, is that going to be a good move? If he puts up subpar numbers again in 2024, whether it's him or it's his receiving core, because he doesn't have the best playmakers, If he doesn't put up those numbers, the entire team will be significantly less competitive. And I don't know, I watched a lot of Jordan Love games. He could be the guy we saw in the last 8 games. He could be the guy we saw in the first 9, and we won't know until we see the season. And Green Bay does have a pretty tough schedule ahead of them, and I'm really curious to see which Jordan Love will get and whether it's his weapons or it's not. And I that's why he's the X factor. I think potentially he's the most X factor I've discussed so far in this series because he really is the game changer for the Green Bay Packers season. If he plays like he did in the final 9, he could be they could be in the Super Bowl conversation. But if he plays like he did in the first, couple, they'll be a 6-win team.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like I said before, I think it's really all about that momentum, just continuing what he did last season. Um, I also think it would be a beautiful irony if Jordan Love took the Packers to the Super Bowl right after they ship Aaron Rodgers out. I think that would be just a beautiful irony.
Yes, yeah, I agree. It would be interesting. I think a lot of people, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks back, a lot of people overlooked the fact that Green Bay was a couple of, tipped balls away from being in the NFC Championship and potentially in the Super Bowl. They have all the talent in the world, and I'm a bigger fan of their defense than a lot of people, especially with Jeff Hafley. Jordan Love holds the fate of the Green Bay Packers in his hands. And if he is as good as he was in those final 8 games where they were, I think, like 6-2, they will be in the Super Bowl conversation and they will stomp some teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, I completely agree. As for the notable rookie, I did end up going with you mentioned him earlier, Edgerrin Cooper, the linebacker. I think he really helps kind of fill in a spot there. He's got the physical talent. He's going to be able to go in and get sacks when necessary. But I really think his biggest role is going to be try to help against the run, do anything possible, take up an extra man, do anything possible to kind of fill this gap where they were just bleeding last season. Um, I think their defense is starting to really find its identity again. These last couple drafts, they've gotten some really physically talented guys, some really big, strong players. I think their defense is kind of finding their identity there, and I think he plugs right in, will fit in well, and really can find a spot here in the defense. What are your thoughts?
I agree. I love Edgerrin Cooper. He was one of my favorite, like I said, athletic profiles in the draft. That was one of the interesting things about the Packers draft is there were not a lot of players that I think are going to start immediately or make an impact immediately, but they also drafted some of my favorite players just in terms of athlete, right? I love Edgerrin Cooper, Javon Bullard, Marshawn Lloyd is a wildly athletic running back. I think that he's going to need some time, but he's a very good running back. Tyron Hopper is just Edgerrin Cooper, but a little less developed. Evan Williams is Javon Bullard, but a little less developed. They drafted a very specific type, and they were very defense heavy, trying to kind of implement Jeff Hafley's scheme. That being said, Edgerrin Cooper was the runner-up for my notable rookie. Mine was defensive back Javon Bullard.
Mhm.
I say defensive back. I think he could be a nickel back, but I think he projects more into a safety role for Hafley's defense. I don't think he plays super well in a split high safety scheme, but he is incredibly effective in a much smaller operation space. That being said, he's going to be very well suited for Jeff Hafley's defense. Obviously, they're going to probably run more of a single high kind of game. And so I see Javon Bullard fitting in that lower safety realm where he can play in front of ex Giant Xavier McKinney, who's going to play that high safety, but he's going to play behind, Edgerrin Cooper and Kay Walker, who are both going to serve as very good linebackers in this new defense. Um, that allows Bullard to really play free. He's a smaller, compact safety. He's going to be able to ball hawk a little bit more, and I think that's what he's going to excel at. Additionally, a side note is I think in a year or two, he definitely can develop into a very effective tight end eraser if coached correctly. And those are rare in terms of having a good one on the roster all the time.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That brings us down to our biggest games. I have a couple listed here, starting off with week one at the Eagles in Brazil. I think it's, yeah, just honestly, it's a good team against a good team. Gives us kind of a chance to see where Jordan's Love momentum is. Is he continuing the momentum? Has his momentum shifted? Is he looking different? Is he better, worse? Um, it takes away some of the home field advantage from either team, which I think levels that playing field and will give us a slightly clearer look into how these teams are going to perform, especially on the road. So that's the first game I picked. I also picked week six against the Cardinals. I picked the Cardinals because the Packers and Cardinals have had some really solid matchups over the years. Um, and they're always a fun pair of
Yeah,
teams
it
to
was.
watch. And then I also picked weeks 9 and 14, which are their games against the Lions. What do you have down for their most important games?
Yeah, you kind of stole both of mine. The first one was week one at Philadelphia. Obviously, I say at, but technically they're both out of the country in Brazil.
Right.
I think that is important for both teams because they're both NFC teams. They're both potential playoff teams. And I think that it can either end up the proving ground for the Packers, kind of the, hey, pay attention, we're actually a good team this year, or it could be a reaffirming game for the Eagles' dominance in the NFC. I think the Eagles have made a lot of changes to their coaching staff that will help that really strong roster really shine. So I think that it could be a very big game for either one of the teams, and whoever loses, it'll hurt. It'll hurt for them. And then I also put weeks 9 and 14. I genuinely, truly believe that Green Bay could be a 12 or 13 win team. But I think that given a couple of games, the Detroit games being some of them, they could be an 8 or 9 win team. They have the talent for that double digit record, but they've got some tough games on their schedule, and the Detroit games are some of them. I think if Green Bay comes away with even one win against Detroit, that puts them in a high seeded playoff spot. With a few more games going their way, they could even threaten Detroit for the division. So I expect that the Detroit Green Bay games will be intense, exciting games to watch.
Yeah, I mean they already have been, especially the last couple of years. There was the game late 2 seasons ago, I believe. Um, the one where Aiden Hutchinson picked off Aaron Rodgers. I mean the energy at that game especially was intense. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I completely agree. I think especially their late game in the season, it's going to be cold, winter football, and they're playing uh, at Green Bay, I believe, in Week 14. So it's going to be a tough, cold matchup for both teams there.
I agree
That
completely.
Yeah, so that'll wrap up the Green Bay Packers and brings us now to the Minnesota Vikings. All right, so for the Vikings, I feel like the strength might be a little bit obvious. At least for me, it was. And that's Justin Jefferson. He,
Yep, that's what I had too.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to point to anything else on that team and be like, oh yeah, that's it. When you've got him sitting right there, he is potentially the best receiver in the league. Um, he's never had fewer than 1,000 yards, and last year was actually his worst statistical season due to him missing time from injury. He only played 10 games, but still crossed that 1,000 yard threshold.
Yep.
He's just dominant. Nobody can guard him. What do you have anything to add? I guess on Justin Jefferson and why he's their biggest strength.
I do. I almost said receiving core, which is true. Their receiving core is very strong. Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, they round out a very good group of guys. But
Mm-hmm.
Jay Jettas is just different.
Yep.
He's just Randy Moss different. And I know that that's a dangerous territory to start comparing players to somebody like Randy Moss, but it's just Randy Moss was one of those guys who you can go into a game with a whole plan saying, hey, don't let Randy Moss catch it. I don't care if they put up 3 touchdowns on their second guy. Don't let Randy Moss catch it. And he'll still catch it 12 times. And that's how Justin Jefferson is. Even 4 years in his career, teams can't stop him. They don't know how to stop him. He's never had under 1,000 yards. And like you said, even last year, he only played 10 games, and he still had over 1,000 yards. I think it was like 1050. Um, if he had played 17 games, I wrote it out earlier, he would have had like 1,823 or something like that. He still would have had, that would have been the second time in his career he had 1,800 yards, which is insane amount of yards. I agree completely. Justin Jefferson is the best player on the Minnesota Vikings and potentially one of the best players in the NFL.
Yeah, and as for that 1,800, whatever you said, that number, if he had played 17 games, that's also probably still factoring in the game he got injured in which I think he only had one catch for 4 yards. So really,
Yep.
you add in some extra yardage there. Um, I mean, he was. There were a lot of people convinced that he was going to be the first receiver to have 2,000 yards in a season, and I think it was completely attainable if he hadn't gotten injured.
Yeah, I mean, he averaged, I think, 170 something yards per game, which put him at just over 1,800. I agree completely. If you take out that 4 yard game, it very well could have been over 2,000. And that's an insane thing to think. Obviously, we had Cooper Kupp almost reach it a couple of years back. Justin Jefferson is miles better than Cooper Kupp. And I say that with the most respect to Kupp, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that brings us up to the biggest weakness. What did you put down for the Vikings?
For the Vikings' biggest weakness, I think it's a good thing that their biggest strength is Justin Jefferson, because as their biggest weakness, I put quarterback. Um, Sam Darnold
Another one where we agree.
is, yeah, Sam Darnold is a fine quarterback. I think he was awful in New York, but he never had a good system. He was awful in Carolina, but he never had a good system. And then we didn't really see him in San Francisco very much. But the one start that he did have against Los Angeles, against a Carson Wentz led Rams in the final week of the season, he played fine. But I think given a year away from the starting role, from the spotlight, and under a coach like Kyle Shanahan, watching a quarterback like Brock Purdy, I think that gave Darnold time to really reflect and learn and just focus on film and focus on improving himself. He's now under a quarter or under a coach, Kevin O'Connell, who runs an offense very similar to Kyle Shanahan. And so I think that he will be a good QB in the NFL, but I don't think he's ever going to be great. So just leaving at baseline Sam Darnold, that's probably their biggest weakness because I think people forget the Vikings have a very good roster. They just had a lot of injuries last year. With weapons like he has, it'll help him look good, but Sam Darnold has deficiencies, and Sam Darnold will always have deficiencies, right? Now, when, not if, the Vikings make the switch to 10th overall pick JJ McCarthy, it's going to change the game. I think McCarthy is a better quarterback than Darnold. However, he is a rookie. He will hit numerous bumps. He has to attempt to adjust to NFL speed in a pretty complex offense that O'Connell runs over in Minnesota. I think he's got all the intangibles you need in a quarterback and a decent arm, very solid frame. But he's got even in college, he struggled sometimes to read the field fully. He was better at those half field reads that Harbaugh gave him, and his arm sometimes does lack. So I think he's going to take some time to really get into NFL rhythm and NFL speed.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm never a fan of taking a rookie quarterback and starting them week one. So I really hope that he's not the starter to kick off the season. I really think that most quarterbacks benefit from sitting behind somebody. I mean, you look at Jordan Love, you look at Patrick Mahomes, right? Give them time to catch up to the speed, the complexity. Um, the only two examples counter to that I can think of right off the top of my head are Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, but they're also elite level quarterbacks. Um,
Hmm.
I'm just never a fan of that. And you pretty much summed up everything about Sam Darnold that there is to say. He's fine. He's okay. Give him a system and he'll be all right. Um, but even then, like I'm not convinced that the Minnesota system is going to suit him really well. And so yeah, I'm concerned about their quarterback position as well. That is what I went with also.
Yeah.
As yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
the QB being the weakest point of this team kind of brings me into my X factor,
Mm.
which is Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones was a free agency signing from the Green Bay Packers this past offseason. I think with QB being a weak point and or developmental point in the eyes of general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and head coach Kevin O'Connell, I think they're going to rely on the run game. They're going to lean heavily on specifically Aaron Jones. And looking at their depth chart, it's not just Aaron Jones is going to play. Aaron Jones is likely to be the bell cow for the Minnesota Vikings offense in 2024. Because of that, there's a lot of pressure on him to perform to the contract that they're paying him and even beyond. Now, if he can play like Dalvin Cook did a couple of years back, like Dalvin Cook did in his prime, the Minnesota offense could be very formidable no matter who's under center, right? Like we talked about, Justin Jefferson being, the player that he is, Jordan Addison being a very good number two, potentially a number one eventually. TJ Hawkinson has consistently been one of the top tight ends in the league. And then whoever's starting under center, McCarthy or Darnold, if Aaron Jones provides good run game and good receiving, it could be a very scary offense to face.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, you kind of took my pick and said everything about it. I think Aaron Jones going to a division rival.
My
No, you're
bad.
good. I think it's really notable that Aaron Jones went to a division rival. Typically, when that happens, players come out with something to prove. They feel like their last
Hmm.
team was, didn't value them correctly, and so they come out with just a lot of energy. And I think Aaron Jones already kind of has that attitude of like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to prove everybody wrong. And so I think we could see a better Aaron Jones than we've potentially ever seen. I know age is, maybe a concern. He's been doing this for a little while. Running backs don't last as long, etc. But I think as far as his energy and his commitment to the game, I think we might see a better Aaron Jones than we did in Green Bay. And I agree, they really need a run game that they can trust. They're going to need somebody that's going to be consistent for when, you know, one of their quarterbacks is having a bad day, when both their quarterbacks are having a bad day. They need somebody who can still get out there, get yards, get in the end zone. And I think Aaron Jones definitely can be that guy.
Yeah, I will kind of counter what you said about Aaron Jones aging. Not that he's not aging. He's not invincible to that. Nobody is, obviously. He does turn 30 in December, but it's worth noting he didn't play as many games last year. It was because of injury, but it was one of his most successful seasons in terms of yards per attempt and in terms of actual success rate. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
in
absolutely.
2022, he ran 213 times. In 2023, he ran 142 times. That's a very stark difference. In 2022, he had 1,100 yards. In 2023, he had 656 yards. 2022, he had 49.7% success rate. In 2023, he had 62% success rate. So, if the Minnesota Vikings can keep him healthy, if he continues that routine, I think he could put up a real good season for the Minnesota Vikings. And like we talked about, if that's the case, Minnesota will be very good on offense.
Yeah, I totally agree. With that, let's now move into our notable rookie section.
Yeah. So before we kind of jump into our notable rookies, I'd like to pay a tribute to cornerback Kyrie Jackson. He was drafted in the fourth round, 108th overall, and unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, news came out that he passed away tragically in a car crash. We wish the best for his family. He had a great future ahead of him. All of his Alabama teammates, his you know best buddy Dallas Turner with Minnesota, they've all wished his family the best, and they're keeping his locker intact all season. I know they're wearing a decal on their helmets, but we wish the best for his family, and unfortunately, it is a very sad thing to face that he has passed away like this.
Yeah, yeah. Prayers for his family and his teammates. I know all of his coaches and teammates spoke really, really highly of him. Um,
Hmm.
just a terrible thing for such a young potential life, a life with so much potential to be torn away. So
Yeah, for sure. Prayers out to him.
yeah,
That being said, I did actually select his former teammate Dallas Turner as my notable rookie.
Mhm.
He was selected first round, 17th overall. And I have some thoughts on him. I think I talked about it previously when we talked about draft classes and everything like that. And I said things along the lines of like, he's really fast, but his pass rushing isn't necessarily the most developed. And I think that that's true. But I saw a quote from a scout. I think it was a Saints scout, maybe? I don't remember. Anyway, I saw a quote from a scout somewhere, and it said, "Stop trying to find players to fit a scheme. Find a dude and coach him." Which, first of all, kind of written in a funny way, but a good quote
Yeah,
nonetheless, right?
right.
And I think that Dallas Turner fits that perfectly. He is an elite pass rushing talent. He needs to learn to be better against the run and specifically power blockers. He gets shut down by power blockers all the time, even at the college level, but he has a very tool set for pass rushing, good hands, deadly speed. Um, and so sure, he has things to learn from, but he has elite pass rushing potential and incredible speed rushing ability already. And I think that in that sense, that makes him my favorite pass rusher from the 2024 class. I think that the Vikings got a steal by taking him 17th. I think he was the third pass rusher off the board. And so I think he's going to be an impact player from day one, which I don't think that can be said about all of the first round pass rushers. Um, Putting him across from Jonathan Greenard, Houston Texans free agent signing, he's going to be a great pass rusher from day one. And I expect hot take, but I expect like an Aiden Hutchinson type of season from him in year one.
Yeah, I think that's a really good pick. The rookie I ended up going with is JJ McCarthy, mostly just because quarterback is such an important position. I kind of have a feeling that they're going to try to start in week one. I haven't seen if they've said anything
Hmm.
official on who's going to start, but it's
I know
just
that
kind of
currently they've said he's going to be the number that Sam Darnold's going to be the number one, but like you said, it might change.
right. I know the pattern the last couple of years has been, start a rookie day one, throw him into the fire. And Minnesota doesn't feel to me like the most competitive team at the moment. So I really, really hope that they hold off, they develop him, they kind of set themselves up for success. But I know they've got a lot of big contracts. They've got some really good players that they're going to want to take advantage of. And if they feel like JJ McCarthy will give them the best shot, they may toss him into the fire a little too early. So he's the rookie I want to keep an eye on the most from the Vikings.
Yeah, that's very true. It'll be interesting to see what they do because, like I said, I do like Sam Darnold as a starter in the NFL currently, and I'd like to see him get a second chance because I don't think he ever got a first one, frankly.
Yeah, that's fair. And that does bring us down to the biggest games. Like I said a second ago, I'm not expecting the most from the Vikings this year. I think they have the opportunity to be competitive if a couple things kind of fall into place correctly. But overall, I think they'll kind of be middle of the pack, maybe upper middle of the pack potentially. So I have their biggest games being their divisional games. I think they need to keep up there. But I did emphasize specifically week 7 against the Lions. The Vikings are coming off their week 6 bye right then. And so they have kind of a good shot at really prepping well for the Lions and potentially stealing a win away from the division rival there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. The divisional games are always important, especially for a team that, like the Vikings, has a very strong roster and is borderline competitive. My biggest games, I put week 8, which is at the Los Angeles Rams. That's
Mhm.
simply because this is Kevin O'Connell's first return to Los Angeles to coach against Sean McVay since he was hired in Minnesota. So Sean McVay was his head coach when he was the offensive coordinator there in Los Angeles. They won a Super Bowl there while Kevin O'Connell was the offensive coordinator, and this is his first return as a head coach to face off against Sean McVay. So it'll be a really interesting game in that sense. And then I
Mhm.
also put Week 14 versus Atlanta. That is Kirk Cousins' return to Minnesota
Yeah.
after his highly publicized departure because Minnesota told him they were going to draft a QB. I think it'll be really interesting because Week 14, Kirk Cousins, obviously, like I said, didn't want a quarterback drafted by his team. The Atlanta Falcons went behind him and drafted Michael Penix. By week 14, if things aren't going so well, Penix could be starting. So it'll be interesting to kind of see who's starting off in Minnesota against, or for the Falcons in Minnesota. And also, regardless of who's starting, it will be an interesting game between two teams who are both trying to break into the playoffs in 2024.
Last up, we have the Chicago Bears. Pick the Chicago Bears secondary. I think they've poured a lot into their secondary over the last couple of years. They've turned out to be a really solid group. And outside of their two free agent additions at safety, Kevin Byard and Jonathan Owens, all of their players are really, really young. Most of them have small contracts, and they're playing at a really, really high level. They were fourth in takeaways last season in total. The Bears were with 28 total takeaways. 22 of those were interceptions, which was tied for the most interceptions alongside the 49ers. And they had three players who all tied with a team high 4 interceptions. So that's a really, really solid secondary, potentially the best in the
Mm-hmm.
NFL. And so that's what I picked as my strength. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. That secondary was great last year. Obviously, they paid Jalen Johnson. I think he's making like $19 million a year now. Kevin Byard's on a decently small contract. Outside of that, we've got all rookie contracts in the secondary in Chicago. You're looking at Tyreek Stevenson, who was a 2022 draftee, if I remember correctly. Kyler Gordon was a 21 draftee. Jaquan Brisker was a 22 draftee. All of these players very good guys, solid people in the secondary. I think Jaquan Brisker is arguably the least good of them all, and he's been great. That secondary, they took away a lot of balls. I think it is worth noting that TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds, the two linebackers, also came away with a decent amount of interceptions. So it wasn't all the secondary. Um,
Yes, yeah.
but yes, the one part of their defense that was consistent throughout the season, through the bad part of the defense and the good part of the year for the defense, was that secondary, was the pass defense. I
Mm-hmm.
agree. I do kind of, my biggest strength did go to the other side of the ball, though. For my biggest strength, I chose the receiving core. Last year, DJ Moore, who was traded from the Carolina Panthers in the 2023 offseason, was the only true threat on the Bears receiving core. Darnell Mooney existed, Equanimous St. Brown was there, but none of them really scared teams. They get a catch, 2 catches a game. DJ Moore, on the other hand, turned 136 targets into 1,364 yards, which is over 10 yards per target, let alone per reception.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good season by one receiver. Now you throw in Keenan Allen and Roma Dunze. This offseason, they traded for Los Angeles Chargers receiver Keenan Allen. He's been the number one since 2014. He is aging, but he's still very dominant. He had 1,243 yards in 2023. Those two guys, Moore and Keenan Allen, are going to be the outside receivers in Chicago this year. Just that alone is a scary prospect for defenses. Now, add in ninth overall selection Roma Dunze from Washington. Roma Dunze, everybody knows, is the coveted combination of size, speed, wingspan. Um, he is a very scary receiver. He's one of those guys that you can hear him play, kind of thing. He's just that big and strong. Given a number 3 role to grow into, this receiving core is very formidable. Adding to the receiving threats, of course, are tight end Cole Kmet, who is consistently one of the strongest safety nets in the league, which is perfect for a rookie quarterback like Caleb Williams to throw to. And then DeAndre Swift, who is a serviceable running back, but also has always been a very solid scat back option to throw to out of the backfield. All of that being said, their receiving threats are going to be very, very good, a perfect way to kind of introduce a rookie to the NFL.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think their pass catchers um, are going to be a really solid group as long as they stay healthy. I think that's the biggest thing. DJ Moore, he's decently young still, but not as young
Mm-hmm.
as a lot of the receivers in the NFL. And Keenan Allen obviously has been around for a while. But yeah, I think overall the talent there is top tier. I don't know that there are many receiving cores better than the Bears receiving core right now.
It's worth noting DJ Moore is only 27. He just turned 27 in April. He's not some old man. I
No,
mean,
not
he
by
was
any
drafted in
means. No.
2018.
Yeah. All right. That'll bring us up to the biggest weakness. Here I've picked Caleb Williams' attitude. No, again, I kid. I actually went with the pass rush. I think Montez Sweat was an awesome addition last year. Um, he was the first player in NFL history to lead two different teams in sacks in one season. He led for the Commanders and the Bears last year. But I think the Bears still need somebody else on the other side to really come in and relieve some of the pressure. Even with Montez Sweat coming in part of the way through the season, the Bears finished 25th in sacks, only having 30 on the season. That's really, really bad. Those are not good numbers. And to take some of the pressure off their admittedly very good secondary, to get the whole defense running on the same cycle, firing on all pistons, I think they really need some help in the pass rush department.
Yeah, I also put the pass rush as the biggest weakness for the Chicago Bears. I think it's worth noting the Bears defense was throughout the season top half of the league. They were top 10 from the day they traded for Montez Sweat, and they were top five in the final 5 to 6 games of the season. The Bears led the league in takeaways.
Mm-hmm.
They were number one in takeaways and sacks in the final few games of the season. And obviously, the run defense was strong throughout the season. We saw the pass rush massively improve after the Sweat trade, but there is still a pretty big hole on the other side of him. Yannick Ngakoue got injured right as Montez Sweat was traded for, so they didn't really overlap a whole lot. The Bears were kind of rotating a couple of guys on the other side of Sweat during those last, 6 or 7 games. And then there's a conversation to be had that rookie Austin Booker could be a very good pass rusher. Obviously, he decided to enter the draft early, despite first or second round projections, if he spent another year in college. But he needs development. So their pass rush may have one more year, maybe 2 years of struggles before they solidify as the top unit.
Yeah, for sure. For the X Factor, we talked about him a little bit previously, Keenan Allen. I think DJ Moore was a really great addition last year. Um, but if you take a look at some of the games from last season where you're up against a team that has a really solid cornerback, like the Chiefs with L'Jarius Sneed last year, the rest of the Bears pass catchers were really ineffective when DJ Moore got shut down. I pulled up the stats here from the Bears Chiefs game last year, which had a final score of 41-10, so kind of a blowout there. If you look at Justin Fields, he finished 11 of 22 for only 99 yards, almost half of which were from DJ Moore. The rest was everybody else combined, and it's just not very impressive when all of your quality falls off after one receiver. I think Keenan Allen's going to come in and he's going to relieve some of that pressure, even if he doesn't take number one from DJ Moore. If he kind of plays a number two, that'll give Caleb Williams more options to pass to and gives him a really solid receiver with a proven history who has a lot of experience and can help guide Williams through this season.
Yeah, I agree. Pretty much every week last year, it was either the DJ Moore show or the DJ Moore and Cole Kmet show, and that's not a good look.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like I talked about earlier with the biggest strength, they brought in a lot of receivers. That being said, though, my X factor kind of plays off of that. I chose quarterback Caleb Williams. Obviously, he was the first overall pick. There are huge expectations
Mm-hmm.
for him as a rookie in the NFL, especially considering the Bears are one of, if not the best team to be picking first overall in the history of the NFL. Um, all the Bears' moves this year obviously put them in real conversation for competing for a playoff spot. They drafted only a few players, but very impactful players. Obviously, no player has more potential to affect that season than Caleb Williams. He calls the shots at the line. It's his decision to get the ball to those receiving core or those receivers that you talked about. If Williams struggles, the Bears struggle. But when he finally puts together at the NFL level, whether that be at the beginning of this year, at the end of this year, next year, whenever it is, the Bears will not be a team to be trifled with anymore. And that's why I have Williams as the X factor for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I put him down as my notable rookie. That felt again like kind of an obvious one. Either him or Adunze kind of just made a lot of sense there. I think the biggest question is like,
Mm-hmm.
is he going to actually live up to all the expectations? He was kind of declared as the given number one pick 2 years ago. Everybody was saying, yep, he's going to be the guy. He's going to be number one. And that's a lot of pressure to put on a young person at all. And now when he steps out on the field, the lights are bright. You know, defenses are going to want to play extra hard against him. What I think the really big question is, can he live up to the expectations? And then if he doesn't, how is the Bears organization going to react? Are they going to put all the blame on him? Are they going to do the same thing they did with Justin Fields? Keep him around for a couple years, don't really
Mm,
build for him, and then kick him out, you know, as soon as they get a chance.
push
I
back
don't
on
I don't
that a
think they
little.
will. I
The
don't
Bears didn't mistreat Justin Fields. The Bears, the new Bears organization, Ryan Poles, Matt Eberflus, they held Justin Fields in hand, but they didn't draft him. That wasn't their guy. And outside of all the things you've heard after he got traded away about, whether he had a bad attitude or whatever the case is, the Bears did try to build around him. This is the best Bears team we've seen in a minute, but they did try. They're not gonna Nobody blamed Justin Fields for the Bears being bad the last couple of years. Justin Fields happened to be in a bad situation, but he wasn't blamed. And if I know one thing about Ryan Poles, the general manager, he when he makes a mistake, he lives up to it quick. And that is the sign of a good general manager. You have general managers like Dave Gettleman in Carolina or the one in New York, 2020, 2021, that era. Those guys, they stick to their guns. They make a bad decision and they stick to it. But Ryan Poles, when he makes a bad decision, he moves on. He traded for Chase Claypool. He traded a second round pick that ended up being the 33rd overall pick of the draft. And when that failed, he cut Chase Claypool. Well, actually, he traded him, I think, for like a sixth. When that failed, he went and traded a bunch of other stuff for DJ Moore. He said, "Okay, I made a mistake. I'm going to live up to it, and I'm going to try it again." And that's something that I really admire him for. And I don't think that he's going to blame somebody else for a mistake that he made. It was his voice calling in the Caleb Williams pick, and it's going to be him who's going to live up to that if Williams
Yeah,
is
I'm
ever the
not
guy.
blaming the current organization for what happened with Fields. I don't think the Bears did a good job building around him. I don't think that, like I said, not the current organization's fault. There's a reason that everybody previous was fired, but I don't think the Bears organization handled Justin Fields well, and I hope that they don't make the same mistakes with Caleb Williams. But if things go poorly, where's the blame going to end up going? Who's going to get fired? Because somebody is going to have to get fired for building a team that on paper looks this good if they don't actually live up to that expectation.
Well, and it's one of those things. I agree. Caleb Williams has a lot of expectations heaped on his shoulders. He is a very mature player. I think that he can handle it. But, even if he doesn't play like the first overall pick they expect him to be, like that generational player. I mean, look at Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence hasn't played like a generational player. He's played very good, but not great, not elite. And he's got a new contract. And if Jacksonville did even half of what Chicago just did in the 2024 offseason to build around Trevor, the Jacksonville Jaguars would look very different and Lawrence would be putting up great numbers. So I think that even if Williams isn't the new Andrew Luck or the new Patrick Mahomes, I think that he is going to be much better than, Trevor Lawrence, for instance, because he has a very good team around him that's going to help support him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said earlier, I'm not a huge fan of ever starting a rookie quarterback week one. Um, but I think how he handles those first couple weeks will help to be indicative of how the rest of his career may end up going, similar to Burrow and Herbert. If he shows up and does well early, I think we can expect really great things from him.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Who did
Um,
you pick for your notable rookie?
yeah, so obviously we've already talked extensively on Caleb Williams. Number one overall pick could be incredible. The team is built, the team is ready for him to take the mantle. Obviously, I mentioned Roma Dunze earlier, elite prospect, gonna be able to develop from that number three role. I talked about the fifth rounder Austin Booker, who could have been significantly higher drafted if they'd waited a little bit. Needs some development, but could be a very good pass rush prospect learning under Montez Sweat. There's only two guys that we haven't really talked about, at least in some detail. That's fourth rounder punter Torrey Taylor. He's a punter. There's some to be said about him. And then that's third rounder offensive tackle Kieran Amegaji, who was taken 75th overall. Um, Kieran Amegaji, he played both tackle and guard at a collegiate level, and he displayed very solid hands. He struggled some against speed rushers. It raised the question of whether he might project better to be inside at the NFL level. That being said, though, the Bears' offensive line is set right now, right? You've got left to right. All of those positions are pretty much full. There's some conversation about center and right guard, but there's three guys that are going to fill two holes. So there's going to be somebody in a position to start the season.
Mhm.
Nate Davis struggled some in 2023 to stay healthy and consistent at right guard. Kevin Jenkins has had some injury concerns in the past at left guard. If either of those players goes down, or even one of the tackles, being Braxton Jones at left and Darnell Wright at the right, no pun intended, Omegaji could definitely slot in any of those positions and provide a serviceable fill-in performance. Obviously, I think he slots in better at guard. Most scouts thought so. The Bears have said that he could start at either position. But I think that he definitely projects to a starting role in the future while still on his rookie contract, which is a very interesting position to be in for him.
Yeah, for sure. All right. That will bring us down to the biggest games. What do you have listed for the Chicago Bears' biggest games?
Yeah, so the first one that I have is week one versus Tennessee. This is a matchup between two of arguably the most improved teams in the NFL. There's only a couple of other teams that even compete with what these two teams have done to build their roster and be competitive in 2024. It could be a game to watch for both of these teams, and it could set the tone for either one of them based on who wins that game. So it could be very interesting. I also have week 17 versus Seattle. Obviously, both of these teams are on the rise teams. You heard what I had to say in the NFC West episode. I'm a very big fan of the Seattle Seahawks this year. Both of these teams could be vying for a low playoff spot at this point in the season, week 17. Both have great defenses and developing high potential offenses. It could be very interesting to watch that game based on what their playoff hopes are at that time. And then
Mhm.
finally, I have week 18 at Green Bay. Obviously, the Chicago Bears play the Green Bay Packers twice, and obviously both of those games are going to be big to, mortal enemy fan bases. Always a great game to watch. But week 18 at Green Bay will be Caleb Williams' second Green Bay game, but his first in Lambeau. It could be a very good game that could affect either or both of those teams' playoff spots. And there's a very real chance that, just based on Williams's, inexperience and everything, that they lose the first matchup. Green Bay has won every matchup against Chicago since 2018. If the Bears lose that first game, Williams could come into Lambeau and there's a chance that they could beat them in week 18, and that could be a very exciting game to watch.
Yeah, I think it's less likely for the Bears to win in Green Bay in Week 18 than in Chicago earlier in the season, but it's definitely possible. It could be a big upset there. I also had the Week 18 game, and I also had the Week 1 game. I did have listed Week 2 at Houston.
Mm,
kind of the same thing you were talking about with the Tennessee game, kind of testing the waters, seeing how, the team is doing. Houston just last year was by far the most improved team. Um, and so it'll be interesting, kind of a good test for Houston, see if they're kind of continuing the same trajectory. But also, I think a really good test for the Bears against a solid playoff team.
Yeah, there's a lot of people saying that the 2024 Chicago Bears are the 2023 Houston Texans.
Yeah,
So that's a very interesting comparison, and seeing them play in this upcoming season, very early in the season, will be really interesting.
yeah, absolutely. That wraps up the NFC North.
Yeah. So to our viewers, once again, thank you so much for watching. We hope you made it through. Obviously, we're both yappers. We love talking about football. We hope you love listening about football. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, turn that bell on. We'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Tell us we're wrong. Tell us we're wrong because that conversation is going to help us learn more about the NFL as well. It was a great time having you guys, and we will be back next week with another episode. That is the AFC East, correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, all of you guys have a great night, morning, afternoon, whatever time it is, and we'll talk to you next week.